Okay.
Okay. Right, well, welcome everybody. We're delighted to have you with us. My name's Emma Bond and I work as a director at a company called Fortuna Admissions, and we help people get into the top business schools around the world. So we're very, very pleased to be here with GMAT Club today and here for one of their live chats to talk to you about how to get into London Business School. So to kick us off, we thought we would introduce ourselves. I'll tell you a little bit about myself and then I'll pass you over to my colleague Amy and she'll be able to tell you about herself. So I joined London Business School as admissions manager in about 2001, so quite a long time ago. Those of you who can pick up the twang in my voice, I come from New Zealand originally and I was educated there. Then I travelled to Japan to work for a couple of years. And when I moved to the UK, my first job was at London Business School and I really fell on my feet. It's an amazing business school and I had a wonderful time working there and helping people come into and join what I believe to be one of the best MBA programs in the world. So I worked there for about 7 or 8 years. And then from London Business School, I went to work at the Boston Consulting Group for the London office. And at that point, I switched to the other end of the pipeline and I started helping LBS MBA graduates move into the Boston Consulting Group offices around the world. So it was a chance for me to, I guess, see the other end of the pipeline and see where our graduates from the business school moved on to. Then a couple of years after that, I was approached by Fortuna and asked whether I would like to come on board, and the company was quite young at that point. And for me, it was the perfect opportunity to kind of marry my consulting work with my love of admissions, and I've been doing it ever since. So we do several of these kind of chats talking about the different business schools in which we have specialist experience, and delighted to be here to talk to you this evening and hopefully help some of you learn a little bit more about how to get into London Business School and just a bit more about the admissions process. So, Amy?
Yes, sure. Hi, everybody. My name's Amy. I actually joined London Business School back in 2006. It was one of my first proper jobs, let's say, after finishing university, University of Nottingham. And I started off in the admissions team, managing the admissions process for candidates applying from Europe and Latin America. And it was a wonderful, really interesting stories to tell and be part of their journey in joining a wonderful business school and in kind of achieving their full potential in life. So I was in the admissions team for a couple of years, which I loved. I then dabbled in the marketing department, but I missed the closer contact with clients and candidates. So I eventually went back to the recruitment side of admissions and ended up as senior manager of client services, covering all degree programs. So that was essentially leading the recruitment activities across all degree programs. So organising the events and continuing to travel and deliver on the email campaigns we sent to our inquiry base. And it was really nice to be back sort of closer to the candidates. And then when I left in 2014, again, I was really lucky to be approached by Fortuna soon after. And now I find myself back in a position where, again, I'm working with fascinating people from all over the world and helping them achieve their dream job. So it's fantastic.
Brilliant. And just while we're at this point, those of you who haven't heard of Fortuna, we do work across a number of the top business schools, and I guess our USP, if you like, the thing that makes us stand out is that all of us on the team have worked for the different business schools around the world, usually in a fairly senior position on the admissions committee, so helping bring the class in and really sort of build the community of the school. So as you can see on the slide that's up at present, we've worked across schools like HBS, Stanford, INSEAD, obviously we were at LBS, but we really do have a breadth of experience across the top schools. And one of the things I love working with Fortuna is that we do a lot of information sharing. So we may have a client that comes to work with us who has a first choice school of LBS, but they may be also looking at an American school, and we knowledge share a lot between colleagues to help our clients get the very best information on all the schools that they're applying to. We do have a free consultation process, and we can tell you a little bit about that at the end. Amy, did you want to just run through how we're going to work things today and what the discussion points are?
Yes, absolutely. So on the next slide, following that one, you can see the discussion points overview. So Emma's going to run through a little bit about London Business School and what makes it special. I'll then talk through who and what is LBS looking for in a candidate, professional backgrounds, personal characteristics, things like that. We'll then cover the points tackling the actual application itself. So we'll have a look at essays, the application form, recommendations, some other tips for you, and then we'll go on to the interview and the video interview. And at the end, after the presentation, we'll open up to questions from all of you guys. So we look forward to that as well.
Okay, fantastic, thanks. So if we can just move on to the next slide, brilliant. So Amy and I aren't going to spend a lot of time on this because we assume that those of you who are interested in LBS have done, a reasonable amount of research already, but we thought it would just be helpful just to touch on the points that kind of differentiate LBS, how it sells itself to potential students, because that was one of the jobs that we did when we were there. So obviously, LBS, one of its key differentiating factors is that it's based in London, and that has a number of advantages. It's a beautiful campus. For those of you who haven't been there, it is situated in a lovely part of London. But the key point of interest really for potential MBA students is the access that that provides to the business community. It's very central. It means that recruiters and businesses are very common on campus. Speakers come on a regular basis. It means that if you are in the middle of a job search, you have very easy access to global headquarters for many, many businesses. And the school has very strong links through its student base, its alumni base, and through staff and faculty with the sort of London business community. So that's probably the first thing to remember. Plus the fact, of course, that London is a fairly amazing place to live. The program itself, the curriculum, was originally founded on the 2-year model, much like the top US business schools. Although over the past sort of, 10 years and more now, it's gone through a series of iterations and curriculum reviews. And one of those has meant that now, instead of graduating necessarily in 21 months, you may also choose to graduate in 15 months or 18 months. There are some trade-offs with that, but it means that if you are sort of looking to fast-track your program, you can graduate much more sort of promptly than you might originally have thought you were able to. And one of the reasons the school brought that in was to basically keep itself competitive with one of its key schools, which is INSEAD, and also some of the other sort of 1-year programs, and allow people to lower the opportunity cost somewhat. So it is a bit of a 2-year model with attitude. One of the ways you can shorten the program is to do things like block weeks. You can perhaps front load some of your electives, etc., etc. So it does tend to work quite well for some people, especially if they're perhaps looking to move quickly back into the job market. One of the other things that differentiates LBS, it does have a very broad portfolio of degree programs. So they run the gamut really from things like the Masters in Management degree, which is a very fairly new program for people with a lower level of experience, may come in straight from the undergraduate degree or may have sort of 1 year behind them. You have the full-time MBA program, obviously, several executive part-time MBA programs, many of which are done with schools like Columbia, HKU and Hong Kong. So there are a number of cross-degree programs with other schools. There's also, for people who are sort of very sure that they want to stay on a finance track, a full-time and a part-time Masters in Finance program, and then a Sloan Masters PhD program, etc., etc. So there are a lot of different options out there. And I've been lucky enough to work with people who've applied to and been accepted to a number of those different programs. And it's really interesting to see sort of people perhaps come in and think they may be a good MBA fit, but after a bit of discussion, they decide actually, perhaps a myth suits them if they know they want to stay in finance, or perhaps they have a bit more experience under their belt and they look into a Sloan master's degree. So there are a number of options at LBS. In terms of the program itself, it sells itself very much as a global program, and I think anybody who's spent time on campus there or been through the program will really sort of understand that the idea of global is very central to the degree. So, when you're studying on the program, the idea is that they're trying to build leaders who are able to go out and communicate and lead and, create change anywhere around the world. So the class is very global, and Amy will talk about that in a minute, but also in the actual curriculum, things like the global business experience, international exchange program. So things like that are very intrinsic to the actual degree curriculum, and the school is continually looking to ways to kind of improve on that and make the experience as global as possible. It's also very flexible. They underwent another curriculum review last year, and there are new initiatives in place at the moment, things like the tailored core, which allows you to start tailoring your program even earlier than you used to be able to, so actually tailor some of your core courses towards your particular areas of interest. So that's something that some people may not sort of know about because it's quite a new development. It's very practical and hands-on, and I think probably, Amy, you'd agree, one of the things that's most sort of central to LBS is how collaborative the students are and how much they enjoy working with each other. So it's still competitive. These are very driven MBA students, but it's all about, you know, working in groups and learning off each other. So yeah, it's one of the things that makes it a really exciting school, I think.
Next slide.
Right, so can we move on to the
next slide? Okay, so who and what is London Business School looking for? So as Emma said, the class is incredibly diverse. MBA 2018, for example, is a class made up of 425 students with 70 nationalities represented. An average of 5 years work experience, but a range from between 2 and 11 years work experience, so quite broad. The GMAT average is currently around 700. It tends to be around there most years, but it really is a very diverse class. A large bulk of the MBA class will come from sort of more traditional MBA backgrounds, so finance, consulting, industry, but actually LBS really values highly the sort of atypical backgrounds as well. So they love people coming from defence, military, medical, media, sports, and this all obviously enriches the whole learning experience for you, and brings, you know, a ton of unique insights and perspectives and the sort of fresh feel. But professional background aside, what's even more important, obviously, is that you've demonstrated you have a sort of a proven track record of success, that you're ambitious, you're driven, and that you've made a really positive impact wherever you've worked, essentially. So drilling down into the sort of personal characteristics of what they're looking for, like I said, intellectually capable, curious, determined, ambitious. They're very team-driven as well. So, you know, proving that you can work very well in a team, and that you have a strong team ethic is really important. An international mindset and drive, obviously, for London Business School is incredibly valuable. So demonstrating that you've had some experiences already internationally, or that you're really keen to have those experiences, is really important. And I have been lucky enough to work with some really fascinating clients through Fortuna, actually, for people applying to London Business School, just to sort of demonstrate some of the diversity that goes through. I've worked with a doctor who was keen to start up their own practice and just wanted the business skills to be able to get there. Another doctor, actually, who wanted to move into their family business but expand into the healthcare industry. Somebody else who was working in Germany at Porsche and wanted to create her own fashion label, which was quite fascinating. Who else have I worked with? Some really fascinating individuals. Oh, somebody who was working as a commercial manager in construction and property development, who wanted to switch over to the company's investment management division. So some really interesting people, which has been great. So now I think we're going to move over to the essays section of the presentation for Emma to talk through.
We are, and I think, you know, this is one of the things that people sort of find the most daunting, really, when they come to an MBA application, is suddenly you have to go back to school and you're thinking about, you know, goodness me, I have to write all these essays. And if you look at, you know, if you're applying to 2 or 3 schools, excuse me, then you can sometimes find yourself, depending on which schools they are, writing, you know, 5, 6, 7 essays. So it can be, you know, quite a sort of thing to overcome. LBS is not quite as daunting as some, in that it only asks really for 1 compulsory essay and then an optional essay. You look at some of the other schools like INSEAD, which has numerous essays. Some of the American schools have sort of 3, 4. So in that respect, it's not quite as challenging as some. Having said that, it also looks quite simple when you look at it. So the essay question, which is up on your screen now, is what are your post-MBA goals? How will your prior experience and the London Business School program contribute towards these? And they have a 500-word limit. So at first glance, this is one of these questions that looks, quite simple. It's why do you want to do an MBA? How does your experience get you there, and what is it about LBS that really attracts you? But I think one of the things that I always say to my clients is that you have to be very, very careful with these questions that look very simple up front. And I think some people sort of make the mistake of thinking, well, I know why I want an MBA, I know what my goals are, and kind of off they go. And quite often, if we're working with clients and we get a first draft through, it's a very kind of convoluted jumble of ideas that are sort of dragged out of somebody's head. And what you actually need to do is make sure that you have a very structured approach to this. So I guess that's my first tip, is that a question that looks very simple on the surface can actually be quite complicated to answer well. What we tend to do working with clients is encourage them to spend a lot of time on self-reflection before they even start working on their essays. And you'll find that whichever school you are applying to, or no matter how many you're applying to, what you must sort of work through right at the beginning is what your short-term and your long-term goals are. So you really need to focus on what you've done in your career to date and how you've managed that, and then have a think about how the program that you're applying to is going to what your growth is going to be through that degree. And then when you come out the other side, where do you want to be? And then perhaps 5 years and then 10 years down the track, where do you want to be then? And if you spend, some time really going through that and talking about it with family members who know you and who know your personality, and friends and colleagues, and your coach if you're working with a company like ours, then hopefully at the end of that process you have some really kind of concrete ideas that you can then start translating into an essay. And that's a really good way to start. I guess the other thing I would say at this point about the word limit is that it says 500 words. We would always encourage people to write more to start with. It's better to have more content that you can edit down at a later time than to sort of be scratching around without really having done that period of self-reflection first. So for the LBS question specifically, it's really a three-parter. So what are your post-MBA goals? So you need to sort that bit out first. How will your prior experience help you get there? And then how does the London Business School program contribute? So with that, you need to be very specific. So prior experience, make sure you answer all parts of the question, but then prior experience, you really need to dig back through your work history to date and pull out strands of specific experience, specific examples that you can refer to in your essay. So it means sort of taking time and going through and looking for examples within your background where you can talk about leadership, you can talk about team skills, you can talk about quantitative analytical abilities, decision-making skills, and all of those things, so that you are linking what you've done in your professional life to date with your career goals, and then where you are ultimately going to end up. And of course, all that work that you put into using those examples, you can usually use with your recommendations and things like that. But Amy, and then I guess the last part of that question, and something which I often find is the least well addressed by clients, and at least initially, is show your passion for LBS and let the admissions committee know what it is that you want to take away from London Business School, and also what you're going to contribute. It's a very specific program, and I think, Amy, it's probably fair to say that admissions committees do have a real passion themselves for the school they work for. So they really want to see, they really want to read that in your essay. What is it that you really want to get out of the school? What lectures are you interested in? What staff are you really, what faculty are you really keen on, attending their lectures? The program is it that you really feel you can't do without, that will contribute to those goals that you've already outlined at the beginning of your essay. So if you can kind of address those three key parts, and then if you give yourself time to write, to edit, to review, and you do that through several iterations, at the end of the day, hopefully you'll come out with a very structured, very solid, and very prepossessing essay that will tell the admissions committee a lot about you.
Yeah.
And did you want to move on and talk about the optional essay?
Yes, absolutely. So the optional essay, the title itself is quite daunting, because an essay that's optional, do you write it or don't you write it? Our clients are often in a bit of a tiz about, you know, do they use this opportunity or not? Are the admissions committee going to judge them if they use this, if they don't really need to? But actually what we say to our clients is that, you know, years ago, London Business School had five essays that covered all sorts of different aspects and gave a really sort of well-rounded view of the candidate. But since they've stripped it right back down to just one question, we actually find that there are some things that we can use this optional essay for most times. So we do recommend you consider using the optional essay. So it could be addressing practical issues such as a reapplication, so just talking through how you've improved your candidacy since the last time you applied, or it could be something like addressing the referees you've chosen, your recommenders. So perhaps you weren't able to speak with your line manager and you want to give the reasoning behind that, for example. Other things that can add value are conveying your global background, for example, and the sort of internationalism and how you're drawn to London Business School for that reason. So sort of identifying with their values and their culture, something like that. Or how you'd like to contribute to the wider London Business School community. So perhaps you've got a really exciting idea that you hope to bring to life when you're there. Maybe you're a volunteer currently and you're really passionate about something and you'd like to connect that passion with some kind of club or event at London Business School. Those things in this essay can be really interesting and give a really sort of different side to you and your character, because there's, you know, little place elsewhere in the application that allows you to do that. What you just have to really be careful about with this essay is that you're providing new information, because obviously anything that's repetitive or boring or irrelevant is going to be totally disregarded by the admissions committee and actually will work against you. So what we often do with our clients is we say, let's just put this on hold until we've got a good idea of the content we're going to use for essay 1 and your application and elsewhere in the entire sort of admissions puzzle, and then figure out, okay, what critical pieces are missing and what really can add value to give a better picture of who you are as an individual. So that's what we recommend generally.
Yeah, I can just jump, Amy, yes, I was just going to jump in there and say that as an admissions reader, we have read so many files in our time at the different schools that we've worked at, and I can say categorically that the one thing you don't want to read is information that you've already read somewhere else, because there is so much to get through with all these different files. So you really do have to be very smart about what you put in this essay. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you've got to get them to sort of sit up and take interest in you. So it's got to be interesting content, exciting content that's going to make them really listen. Another thing to consider to using this essay for, sorry, just back to the former slide, thank you, is, for example, if you've got a chronic illness or a disability and you'd like to explain that in this essay, but what we always say is just try and always put a positive spin on this kind of thing and weave in the learnings you've had through these challenging experiences and things like that. Okay, so that's the optional essay. And now on to the next slide, please, which is all about the application form. So a lot of schools have an application form which is simply a gap filling exercise, but London Business Schools is not. So don't leave it till the last minute. Please factor in enough time to do this properly. They have given this application a lot of thought and have put in specific questions to learn more about you, gain a more detailed understanding of what you do in the workplace, where you sit within the organization, how your career has developed, also what you do outside of your professional life, and just to get a better understanding of you as an individual. There are sort of hidden mini essays, if you like, within the application, so it's really important to spend a lot of time on this. The admissions team actually generally read your file in the following order. They'll look at your CV, then your application form itself, then your essays, then your references. So by the time they've got to the essays that you spent hours and hours and hours on, they've already formed a pretty solid view of who you are and how strong a candidate you are. So really important to give this as much time as you do the essays. A few examples of the hidden essays are the job description. So tell us more about your responsibilities, essentially. So they will have already been given a snapshot of your career to date, having read your one-page CV, but that's only a little bit of information. What we always say is I remember reading files back at London Business School, and often people would just cut and paste what they had in their CV into the application form, which drove me mad. So please don't do that.
Just spend some time on this and really think about what they're asking. They're looking for a further insight into your day-to-day life in your job, essentially. What do you get up to on a daily basis? Where do you sit within the hierarchy? It's your opportunity to give a bit more, paint a better picture of your professional life. There's another question in there called tell us about your main interests and activities in your free time. It seems like such an insignificant question, but actually it's really important because it's your opportunity to give us an insight into who you are as an individual and what's important to you outside of your career. So it's a great opportunity for you basically to sell yourself a little bit more from another point of view. We always say it's good to sort of focus in on a couple of key interests that you have in your life. So not just listing a number of things that you like doing day to day or at the weekend, but focus in on 3 or 4 of your main interests and give some detail on those. Why are you so passionate about them and things like that. So they can range from sports. It's always good to include a team sport because obviously that shows your team skills, volunteering, travel, spending time with family. But like I said, it's always important to tie it back to why they're so important to you as well. The other thing is what a relatively new hidden essay, well, it's not really an essay, it's 100 words, is tell us about your most significant international experience to date. And this actually used to be one of the essays they included. So 100 words is hardly anything. So you've got to really spend some time thinking of which have been your most significant experiences, what's going to add value here significantly. This is obviously a really important piece for London Business School because internationalism is really important. They are a very global business school, so they want to see that international drive. And obviously if you haven't had those experiences yet, then it's important to convey that you hope to have them one day and you're really passionate to do that. Okay, so that's the application form. If we could move on to the next slide. Unless, Emma, you have anything to chip in there?
No, I think I was just going to follow on with what you said, which was that the point you made there was critical, really, that some of those sort of mini essays, as they're now called, within the application form used to be real big essays. And I think that is an indicator of how important it still is to put time and effort into those. The fact that they used to be, have a full essay dedicated to them. You have to think just as carefully about the 100 or 200 words as you used to about the 500, but you have to be much more concise and much more direct and really think, about using every one of those words. Every word that you use in all of your essays should be working as hard for you as it possibly can do, and that's across everything in your application. No wasted space, no wasted words. If you've said something already, don't say it again a different way just to fill in space. Make the words that you've got really work hard for you.
Absolutely. Okay, so on to recommendations. This is obviously another really important piece of the application puzzle. It's the only sort of third-party perspective that the admissions committee are going to get of you until interview. So really, really important. They ask for 2 recommendations covering things like strengths, weaknesses, where they see you working in 10 years' time, your leadership potential, and they also ask you they ask the recommender, to rate you on certain competencies as well. The biggest tip we can give to you here is to choose your recommenders really, really carefully. It's far more important to choose someone that you've worked closely with and that really knows you as a professional over someone who's got a senior title, because they're really not going to get any insight into you and how you work that way. So think about who knows you best professionally, who is going to be more insightful when sort of thinking of examples, who's going to be a real champion for you and use lovely positive language to sort of talk you up, essentially, and who likes you, really important. Get in touch with your recommenders, give them as much notice as possible, take them out for a coffee or just have a call with them if they don't live close by, and talk them through why you're going through this process. Why are you going to do an MBA? What do you hope to achieve by doing it? Why are you so passionate about this? Make them understand why this is so important to you and how valuable their recommendation will be in helping you get a place into the school. And also really reassure them, I suppose, because, you know, a lot of these people are very busy. They don't have much time to write up a detailed recommendation. So just reassure them that you can help them through the process and guide them on content that they can use, the key points you hope they'll highlight, and sort of remind them of examples that you did whilst you were working together, just to sort of help them through the process itself. And on that point of examples, actually, that's a really critical piece, is please use them, because if you're saying things about, you know, this person's really good at X, Y, and Z, that's fine. But if you back it up with an example, it's so much stronger. So really, really important to use examples that bring it to life, essentially.
And that, Amy, that goes back,
yes.
sorry, I was just going to say, it goes back to the time on self-reflection that I was talking about earlier on, that, you know, none of that time is going to be wasted, because going back through, you know, thinking about what you've done, how things that you've done and achievements that you've had at work have, you know, provided a concrete example of those sort of core MBA look for, those skills. You can use them in various different parts of your application. So that time that you spend is absolutely crucial. You need to know yourself and know your work history and how you've, you know, how you've succeeded, what you've done and where you've done it. And that way, you know, that if you can provide that kind of information or jog your recommenders' memory, it saves them time, and that takes away some of that sort of trepidation that Amy was talking about, when people think, crikey, I don't have time to dedicate, you know, 4 hours this week writing some person's reference for business school. And also check that they know what an MBA reference entails, because some people have done them before and some people haven't.
Absolutely. And so often we hear, you know, oh, my recommender is really happy to help me, but he wants me to write my recommendation for him, you know, on my behalf, essentially. We obviously strongly advise against this, because something that's written authentically and in their own voice is going to be much more powerful. But you can still guide them through the process and give them hints and tips, and, you know, give them a bit of a structure and points to highlight, like I said before. So, you know, you give them the bare bones structure potentially, but have a conversation with them at least, and then they can flesh it out in their own voice and edit as they see fit, but it should come from them. Oh yes, and the final point on that slide is, if you know an alum or a current student from London Business School, approach them and ask them if they would be willing to write a personal recommendation for you, like submit a character reference, because these can add a ton of value to your application. Obviously, the admissions team really trust what their students and alumni say, because it's their brand. So if they're going to endorse someone who's applying to the program, then they'll trust what they're saying, essentially. So this can be really powerful addition to the picture. Okay, and I think we're going to move on to the next slide now for Emma to talk us through some helpful tips.
Right, so these are just a few kind of things that we were talking about in terms of, you know, what are sort of the added bits of useful information that can make quite a big difference to your application. And the first one, actually, which I meant to mention earlier on, is actually timing of your application. So London Business School has 4 rounds, so like some of the other European schools, but more than many of the US schools. We would always recommend that you apply as early in the year as possible. There are a couple of reasons for this. One is that if you apply in September, you know, it's very nice for you if you get an offer to be able to tie everything up early and just have that in the bag, that offer, and you're, you know, you're not competing with everybody else who's applied through the year. There's a very big deadline in early January where you tend to get the bulk of the applications, and then there's round 3 and round 4, which work through into, I think it's April, and then into May, June. And they are smaller rounds, but if you apply in those rounds, you're also going up against anybody who's been waitlisted earlier on in the year. So you can, you know, you can really sort of shoot yourself in the foot by leaving it too late. And often if people are applying in round 3 or round 4, they're doing it in a bit of a hurry, and they perhaps don't have the time to spend on really putting together the best application possible. So whilst we would say, you know, it's definitely, don't rush it, but if you can make one of those sort of first 2 deadlines, that's what we would recommend. And it also enables you to apply for scholarships, which may have already been awarded if you leave it to apply later in the year. So that's the first thing. Test scores, and you know, this is a question that almost every candidate or client that comes to us at Fortuna will ask quite early on, is, you know, unless they've got a 760 GMAT already, is, do I need to retake? You know, is my score good enough? Will retaking it and boosting it by 20 or 30 points make a significant difference? So I think there are a couple of things to consider here, and one of those is that you should consider what your quant score is. So it is still a very heavily weighted part of the GMAT or GRE scores. if you, for example, come from a liberal arts background and you're not able to demonstrate significant quantitative ability elsewhere in your application or in your CV or in your job or in your, in your undergraduate degree, then it's perhaps more important that in your GMAT score you show, a good quantitative percentage. If you have come from, an undergraduate degree where you have a lot of those kind of courses already and you've done particularly well, but maybe for some reason that area of your GMAT just fell back a little bit, it's not quite so critical. The GMAT average for LBS sort of hovers. I mean, back in the day when I started, I think it was 680, 690. It's now up to 709, 710, something like that, Amy, I think it is this year. So it is increasing every year. It's not yet as high as some of the US schools, and it's definitely not a make or break. So you shouldn't be put off if you haven't, hit 700, hit 710, but you should be aware that, it is a balance to whatever else is going on in your application. So, the committee will look at you look at your file as a holistic process, and they will consider the GMAT or the GRE as one factor in that. If you have a score of around 680, 690, but you know that with a bit of extra study you can boost it to 710, 720, then by all means I would say that will do you no harm at all and can possibly really sort of work in your favour, because end of the day, at some point there's a cut-off, and yes, there's a range from 600, 610 through to 780, but it's definitely a curve with the peak sort of around 690, 700, 710 at present, and that will continue to increase. So that's one thing. Research, absolutely crucial. I can't say strongly enough how important it is to the admissions committee, both when they're reading essays, just when they're getting a feel for how well you know the school, that you've done your research. And one of those sort of questions that Amy was talking about on the application form asks, what contacts have you made at school? What information sessions have you been to? And you need to be able to demonstrate that you're not just applying to LBS as an afterthought. That's really important, that the person reading your file believes you that it is your number one school. Now, it might not be, and we're not silly enough to think that it is going to be the number one school for everybody that applies there. But for the purpose of that application and those essays and the passion that you demonstrate, it needs to be. So the best way to kind of demonstrate that is to make contact with student clubs and go onto the club's websites, contact people in the admissions team, find out, who you can speak to learn more about the program, find out about conferences and clubs and areas where you can contribute, and sort of start building that network and those contact points, because all of those can be included in your application, and it really does make a difference. Somebody who's put a lot of time and effort into building that network already, to someone who says, have you been to an information session? No. Have you got any contacts in the school? No, because it really just suggests that perhaps you haven't put in the effort that you could have. So that's something to bear in mind. And on that note, I would just say, if you can visit campus, and clearly it's not possible for everybody, but it is a great thing to be able to do, because if you go at the right time of year, you can sit in on a class, you get to perhaps speak with some of the student ambassadors, meet some of the students, perhaps go along to Sundowners, which is the weekly sort of after school drinks that they have on a Thursday night. So things like that, and you really start to get a feel for the community and what makes the school sort of special, if you like. And the more you know about it, the more likely it is that sort of real understanding is going to come through in your essays and your application. If you're not able to do that, then the other option is to attend, information sessions near you or MBA fairs, and try and speak to somebody and just really understand a little bit more about, about what makes the school, the place that it is, and the global and the flexible and all the things that we've been talking about. So yeah, so I think now if we move on, we're going to talk a little bit about interviewing. And, if you are lucky enough to be invited to interview at LBS, it is an interesting process. Can we have the next slide, please? Thanks. So if you are invited to interview, you'll get an email probably advising you that you've been shortlisted, and then within about 2 weeks after that initial one, you will have follow-up saying you are going to interview with one of the school's alumni. Excuse me. So the interview will normally take place where you're based. So you'll have put on your application form, 3 options in terms of where you would like your interview to be. And the school will spend that sort of 2 weeks trying to match you up with somebody, hopefully who comes from the same sort of background as you, or has worked sort of in the same functional area, or has some kind of connection to you, so that when you meet them and when you have your interview, hopefully there's some sort of touch point that you can work with from the start. The issue with the LBS interviews is that because they're done by alumni, it doesn't matter how much training you give them, and I was heavily involved in that when I worked at the school. It doesn't matter how much you say to people, you know, we're going to send you all the information, you need to read through the files, you need to do X, Y, Z, we're looking for, you know, A, B, C. There are always different takes on that information, and different candidates interact with different alumni in different ways. So we always say to our clients, you know, we expect that the interview will be like this, but it's not necessarily going to be that way. And I know from the last sort of 5-6 years doing this, that the interview feedback that comes back from our clients, you know, you can go from a 45-minute chat in a coffee shop to a very formal, you know, 1.5-hour interview in a consulting office somewhere where you come out, you know, very sweaty and stressed. And it really does just depend a bit. But fundamentally, 99% of the time, you know, you should have a good experience, and they are trying to get the best out of you. But the alumni are, as Amy said, you know, they're focused on finding candidates and who will grow their brand, you know, and be a positive influence on the school when they arrive. In terms of what the interviews are looking for, the interviewer will have been through your complete file, so your essays, your recommendations, which is different from some schools, and, you know, everything that was submitted. They will have a form to fill in, which they send back to the admissions committee, and on that they'll be looking to assess you on your sort of work experience, on your international experience, things like your charisma, you know, what you know about the school, your structured and analytical thinking. So there will be a variety of different questions that will try and assess your abilities in those areas. And one of the things that we do at Fortuna is work with you on, you know, those kind of questions and answering and dealing with those kind of situations, and making sure that you have sort of mock kind of practice to just get on top of those kind of things, because they can be slightly different than sort of professional interviews that you do for a job. One of the things that the school introduced, gosh, 10 years ago now, probably even more actually, was this impromptu presentation, which puts fear into many of our clients. And that is something that was introduced really to get an idea for how people think on their feet, to find out how they are standing up and presenting and putting together an argument on the spot. There's a range of different topics that change from year to year, but it will be a question usually about something that's kind of in the news or current events or business kind of model or company. And you'll be given sort of 5 minutes to look at the question, to structure your thoughts, and then at the end of that time you have to stand up and you know, present your argument and your conclusions to your interviewer. So it can be quite daunting. I think that's probably another sweaty moment for most people. But I think the top tip there is probably to remember that it's not about catching you out, and it's not necessarily all about what you say. It's also about how you present yourself. You know, are you convincing in what you're saying, and are you delivering your ideas clearly, and are you selling yourself and what you have to say? And that's a really big part of it. And then I'm just going to hand over to Amy, because the video interview is a new component that came in last year that LBS is sticking with going forward. So Amy, did you want to have a word about that?
Yes, absolutely. So as Emma said, the video interview is a new element that they've introduced, and it allows the admissions committee to get a glimpse of who you are as a person, because generally they don't get to meet you at interview because the alumni do it. So it's a nice additional element that allow them to get a more rounded picture of you, essentially. It's a very brief snapshot, but it still gives them a sense of your character and your ability to think on your feet and answer in a clear manner. So one of the key things they're looking for is authenticity. So it's really important to be yourself. They just want to understand who you are. Are you going to fit within their community, within the culture of London Business School? You'll be asked 2 questions. The first one is set and is the same for all candidates. So it is, what will you gain from London Business School that you won't gain from another MBA program? you can start preparing your answer now to that one. So essentially, this one's all about doing your research. So as Emma said before, start connecting with the community, learning about, all the electives, the core content, the treks available, the clubs, the events, every aspect of London Business School that you can. Because this question is all about conveying your passion for the school and really demonstrating clearly why this is the only school for you to achieve your dreams, essentially. The second question is random, different for all candidates, and is only given to you on the day you actually submit your video interview, essentially. You only have 30 seconds to prepare it on the day, so it's quite a sort of nail-biting experience, but obviously the key to this and to the other question is about preparation. But some of the questions that we've had in the past from clients have been the following. So describe a time you've experienced different cultures and what did you learn? If you could invite 3 famous people to dinner, who would you invite? Who is your favorite musician? What is your role model? Who is your role model and why? What was the last book you read? What did you like about it? What are the advantages and disadvantages of being your own boss? So some really sort of a hugely different mixture of content there and questions. But like I said before, the key to success is preparation, getting familiar with the format. So, practice makes perfect, practice, 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 and not only on paper. Take videos of yourself, time yourself properly, really make it as real as you possibly can, and do it again and again and again and again until you're comfortable with it. And of course, be yourself. As I said before, authenticity is key. They just want to see who you are, essentially. And I say to the clients I work with, this is actually a really fantastic opportunity for you to give a glimpse of who you are. The admissions committee have only seen you on paper so far, so this is really a lovely opportunity. So try not to see it as a scary thing, see it as a good thing. And I think that brings us to the end of our presentation. And so now I think we can move on to questions from all of you.
Absolutely, and do feel free to shoot them in, and hopefully we'll be able to answer and just sort of follow areas where you would like to find out a little bit more.
Fire away. People are busy typing, obviously.
Okay, and yeah, we should just let you know actually that that emails are going to come up in the description box. So if you want to send us a question, they'll come up and we'll be able to answer them. Okay, so the first question we've got is, how would you recommend applying to LBS in round 2? I think, as I said before, there are 4 rounds. So the first one is coming up remarkably quickly, as it always does, in September. The second one, I think, is January the 3rd or January the 4th. It's certainly in around that week directly after the new year. And the second part of this question says, especially for international applicants. And I think the first thing to just point out to people is that all people who apply to LBS are considered to be international applicants, because every year, usually, fewer than 10% come from the UK. So there is no real disadvantage at all to applying in round 2. That's where you get a big number of applications, but the school and the admissions committee are very aware of that. So at the same time as they get a big bulge in applications, they will also offer a corresponding percentage of places. So I don't think anybody should be worried about that. I think you should just, aim to apply when you have the best possible application sorted. But if you can, don't leave it to round 3 or round 4. But it doesn't really matter whereabouts in the world you're applying from, what your nationality is, what your professional background is. That's not going to make any difference in terms of how you are considered.
Excellent. Thanks, Emma. I just saw another question flash up as well that was, how important are extracurriculars, even if you've got a strong GMAT, strong career and a strong GPA? Very is the answer in a nutshell. They are London Business School are looking for people who are going to get involved in all aspects of school life, essentially. Yes, they want people who've had a stellar career. Yes, they want people who've got brilliant academics and a strong GMAT, but they also want people who are really going to get involved and contribute, both inside and outside the classroom. So by giving them information that says you've already done that in your life, it obviously says to them, yes, you're going to do the same at London Business School as well. So if you're nervous that you haven't currently got enough time to dedicate to all those kinds of things, think back to some of your passions, during university, perhaps, and talk about those. And it's difficult because you can't, if you've not got quite enough time to sort of start the process of, resurrecting some of those things, then obviously you can't lie in your application form, but it is really important to demonstrate that you do have an interesting life outside of work, essentially. Hope that answers your question, Emma. If you want to chip in at all, I don't know.
No, I'm going to move on to another one. There's one here about what is called international experience. So if someone with from India does a degree, then has only worked in the US, does his experience in India count as international? And the answer is yes. So LBS, when they're looking at international experience, they don't just consider your work experience. What they consider is you as the whole package. So they will look at your educational background. They will look at, whether you have lived in different countries and moved and traveled when you were younger and, as an adult. They will look at your professional experience. And obviously it's a bonus. If you've worked in 4 different countries and you speak 6 different languages, well, that's great. But they also look at things like the type of clients that you're interacting with. So you may be based in India, but, interacting on a daily basis with clients across Europe or colleagues, in the US or in Asia Pacific, so all of those things can be taken into consideration. The thing is that what you need to then do is perhaps use that optional essay that Amy was talking about earlier to demonstrate how you are filling their kind of international criteria. And you need to be smart about how you pitch yourself and how you present yourself. But yes, you can use all those kind of areas of your profile to make sure that you're addressing the international component that LBS is looking for.
Okay, there were another couple of questions that popped up just then. I'll take the first one. Emma, I don't know if you saw the second one. I've written it down in case you haven't. But so I'll remind you. The first one was, how would you compare London Business School with INSEAD? Which is it's a tricky question because actually it's really important that you do your research about the schools you're interested in applying to, as we've said. But I mean, they're very different schools, essentially, in terms of the structure of the course itself. It's a 1-year program versus a 21-month or earlier exit points, as Emma detailed earlier. So it's, it's an entirely different experience altogether. The additional time gives you that extra time to sort of get involved a bit more on campus, to explore other options career-wise, I suppose. It's also situated in very, very different locations, which, to me, they're sort of chalk and cheese in a way. They're incredibly different schools, whilst they're sort of often, they are one of our key one of London Business School's key competitors, but they are incredibly different schools. But for me, my strongest advice to you, if you're not sure which one's right for you, is just to try and visit them both and see which one you feel more at home with, which one you feel more comfortable with, and just do as much research and make as many connections as you possibly can.
I think with that, I mean, and I love the little add-on bit there which says, would Caroline agree, disagree? Who's our colleague?
I left that bit out, sorry.
And Amy and I are quite pro LBS, but also very positive about INSEAD, and Caroline is the opposite. But I think she would definitely agree with us that both schools are amazing schools, and if you're lucky enough to be offered a place at either or both, at either, then you're very lucky. At both, then you've got a really tricky decision to make. But I think they're both hugely international. They have a very global focus across their curriculum and their community, and it probably comes down sometimes to opportunity cost. INSEAD is still a shorter program, but also about, fit. And that's where Amy was saying, if you can get to campus and get a feel for the school and for the students that go there and talk to as many people as you can at both schools, that's probably the best way to find out where you're likely to enjoy your experience, because at the end of the day, that's probably what it comes down to. I was going to, where is the question? There was one I had here, I was interested.
There was one about working and living in London, never working abroad.
Yes,
Did you see that one?
Yeah, that's the one. So somebody was
Yeah.
asking about, could you give thoughts on applying as somebody from London who went to university in London? What sort of international picture would you paint if you've never lived abroad? So one thing I would say is that LBS is very, very keen to hear from UK applicants. And the rationale for that is that because often people do want some international kind of perspective to a postgraduate degree, often we used to find that people who had studied in London would then target perhaps a school abroad. So they'd be, you know, the top students who'd been to London universities or UK universities would head off over to the Ivy League schools into the US or to other European schools. And consequently, LBS really is always very keen to hear from British applicants. They would love to get the percentage of British applicants higher. I think it's still around 9 or 10%, and they would like to increase that. So there is certainly no disadvantage. In terms of how you position your international experience, that's when, if you haven't worked abroad, you have to start digging into your existing clients, your colleagues, you know, how you interact with others from abroad within your work. If you haven't done that, then yes, you probably are going to have some issues, and it might be that you perhaps want to start thinking about requesting a secondment if you're in a role somewhere where you have that option to go abroad for 6 months. I do know somebody who was educated in the UK, who was British, who went to LBS, and prior to coming into the program, he had done 6 months working for KPMG in Munich. So he had taken himself off and, you know, spent some time abroad to be able to add that into his profile. But generally speaking, you know, coming from Britain is actually a positive thing for applying to LBS, so I certainly wouldn't let that put you off. And if you want to ask about that specifically, good idea to just pick up the phone, call the admissions office and have a chat with someone, and they'll, you know, be able to talk you through it. They're a very approachable admissions team on the whole. So yeah. Except the day or two before a deadline, and then then I don't advise perhaps calling on those days.
There was a question that popped up, and I'm afraid it didn't stay on the screen long enough, but there was one after that said, I'm 21, I'm in my first job as an analyst, and I'm thinking about applying in 3 or 4 years. What can I do now? The first thing I would advise is to start thinking about your goals. What do you hope to achieve from doing an MBA? So once you've got that goal in sight, you can start thinking, okay, how can I manipulate my career now in order to support my application to an MBA and achieving that goal at the end of the day. The other thing you can do, obviously, is to start researching the school, visiting the school, making connections. But it's all about, you know, maintaining or giving yourself every opportunity to have a really strong career, to demonstrate any leadership, you know, budget responsibilities, project management, anything that can really indicate that you've got really strong potential to be a leader in the future, and do that research as well.
Thanks, Amy. Yeah, there's another question here which is quite interesting. Where's it gone? For international applicants, how viable do you think the UK is for a post-MBA career considering the current geopolitical situation? So yeah, that's a question that all the business schools in the UK have been talking about a lot since the Brexit vote went through last June. And it's a question that's difficult to answer because the situation here is so fluid at the moment in terms of, you know, what sort of Brexit we're going to have, whether Brexit will happen, you know, and then how that affects the different business schools and the job market. I think the only thing I can say with certainty, 2 things. One is that at current exchange rates, your degree in the UK is going to be a lot cheaper than it would have been a year and a half ago. So if you're looking at trying to lower the cost of living in a city like London, that's one thing to consider. The other is that at this point there are no visa restrictions that have been brought in, but it's certainly a situation that you should look at, and there is a very specific visa office at LBS and a wonderful ex-colleague of ours who gives out very detailed advice on how you know, students are likely to be affected moving forward. And the other thing that I should mention there is that if by chance the job market does get slightly squeezed in London, I don't think it's going to get squeezed enormously because it's still a huge city with a huge, you know, workforce, and they will need to recruit regardless. And international applicants coming from a top business school like LBS have specific visas which will allow them to move on and work. But the other thing is that if business schools, if recruiters start to narrow the pool of business schools that they're recruiting from, the one that I can guarantee they'll still be going to is LBS, because of the brand and the reputation that the school has in the city and in the wider business community. So providing you can get confirmation from the visa office that, you know, your specific nationality will still, you know, be able to move forward afterwards. And as yet, we have had no indication from anywhere that, you know, graduates from LBS won't be able to move into the job market. I don't think it's likely to be a major for that particular school.
Another question popped up saying that they work 80 hours a week and unfortunately can't squeeze in any time for extracurriculars. So it's another one on the extracurriculars and how can you mitigate this? I think you can sort of be a bit upfront about this in that mini essay included in the application form and say, look, I have a really demanding job that requires me to work 80 hours a week. However, in the spare time I do have, it's really important to me to do X, Y, and Z. It could be spending time with friends and family, you know, and why that's important, because this will show, you know, what's important to you as a person, what your values are. So it is important. You know, you can include things like travel. I'm sure you have a holiday or two each year that hopefully you can talk about and things like that. But also you could use the optional essay again to demonstrate how you hope to have, you know, whilst you're during the MBA experience, have time to be able to contribute to those extracurricular activities, the clubs, the events. You really want to be the kind of person that can get involved. Perhaps you were at university and you hope to resurrect that aspect of you as a person. It's just at the moment your job is just too demanding.
I think the other thing, just the other thing, and this is actually from my time working at BCG, is that, you know, working with consultants there who really were under the cosh time-wise, is that you can also talk about what you've been involved with in the work environment. So if you are taking on leadership roles at work which are not specifically related to your actual, you know, functional role, but you're working on, you know, can be, you know, women in consulting, for example, or you know, whatever your work is involved with, or, you know, Friday night drinks that you organise, or any of that kind of stuff. Yeah, exactly. So any of that kind of thing can be useful to include, because it is absolutely a fact that some people are really in jobs that don't allow them to you know, perhaps develop the extracurriculars that they would like to. But it is an important part of the application, so you do need to put some thought into that. And again, that's something that, you know, we would work with you to work out how you present sort of the best side of yourself in that way. I'm just looking at the time. I'm conscious that we need to wrap this up. We've had some great questions. What I would say is that just in terms of people we haven't been able to answer, you can feel free to perhaps contact myself or Amy with any still outstanding questions that you might have. You can perhaps go through the website, and the slide for that will pop up in a minute with our web link, or you can contact us directly. My email address is emma.bond@fortunaadmissions.com. It's a bit of a mouthful, and Amy's is amy.hugo@fortunaadmissions.com. But what we would encourage you to do is pop onto our website and take advantage of the fact that we offer a free 30-minute consultation if you're interested in you know, working with us, or perhaps just investigating your options in terms of which business schools you would like to attend, because you know, we do like talking to people. There's no pressure at all, but we do like to hear people's stories and find out where perhaps they would like to go with their MBA journey. And hopefully we will end up, you know, discussing some of your stories and working with you in person, because as Amy said at the beginning, we get to work with some really fascinating people. But yeah, anyway, so we would like to say thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you again to GMAT Club for the opportunity to speak to everyone this evening. Hope you found it useful. And if you can just pop up that next slide for us, that would be great, and that will have all the details in terms of contacting us if you need to.
Oh, here it comes.
Yeah, it's coming.
Can it go on the main screen?
I think we've still got you on the main screen, Amy. You've been on for...
Oh, I thought you were on the main screen.
Oh, then I think we both are when we're talking.
Okay, I see.
Here comes the final slide.
Oops. Here we go.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. So there we go. So if you want to sign up for a free consultation, there's the address and also our general email address. If you want to, you can just contact us through that and we happily answer any questions that you might have. But otherwise, thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely look forward to hopefully hearing from you soon. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.